A Trip into the Darkness, Chapter 17. It was just past 1:30 in the afternoon when Troy got the call which would turn his world upside down and hurl him into a state of complete rage. Prior to the call, he had been in New York City attending a conference with others in his industry, discussing the complications surrounding the release of lisinopril and what his personal empire was doing to repair the damage. Troy had been hopeful that by the end of the meeting everything would be in order and the entire issue would no longer be a problem. Lisinopril had set his company back a couple of $1 million, but in the scope of things that was nothing more than a drop in the bucket. The real hassle had not been appeasing the dead's family or helping those who had survived but suffered serious complications. No, the problem had been finding a way to keep the media from spreading the news to the public, which involved quite a few more deaths than Troy would have preferred. After the matter of covering up the issue was taken care of, the next problem they faced involved figuring out how something like this had happened. His labs were foolproof, so for a drug to be released and to have caused so many problems meant that there was a rat in the system which polluted the results and covered up the side effects during the lab testing. That had been one area that Troy enjoyed uncovering during the midst of all this craziness. It had not been difficult to unveil deleted footage from the cameras or track down the idiot who thought he could trick Troy Dinhart and the Dinhart Empire. He simply looked for the being overseeing the primary testing of lisinopril. Securing the rat, the next step of action had been torture to figure out who had paid him off. Troy was not a sadist, but when it came to torturing a rat that had set out to harm him, he quickly changed his demeanor. After a few short hours of torture, he had the name of a rival empire from another country, along with all the supporting evidence that the rat had acquired. Troy was still working out details involving that part of the debacle and what the next, that was the reason for the meeting in New York. He was there to discuss with his colleagues the best strategy to revenge his company. After all, they all own stock in pharmaceuticals within the U.S. and other parts of Europe. If one of them was hit with bad publicity, it would affect them all. He had only been in New York for 2 days when the call came, interrupting his debate about the next course of action. Glancing at his phone, he saw it was Marcus, his head of security at the manor. With a sense of dread, Troy had excused himself from the meeting to take the call. Marcus would only call if it was urgent and not a matter to be discussed through text. Answering the call, he was informed of the assumed break-in. Someone had breached the faculty and set fire to the east quarter of the upstairs region. Troy also learned that Jacques was missing, and video footage of the grounds showed someone jumping out of an upstairs window and stealing Jacques' vehicle. Ice-cold dread settled in the pit of Troy's stomach as he envisioned his pet escaping him. Troy had ended the call quickly and apologized to his colleagues, informing them that another meeting would have to be arranged to work out the rest of the details because he was leaving immediately. Once he was seated in his personal vehicle that had been waiting for him at the door of the building, he pulled out his phone and pulled up personal video footage of the safe room. As soon as live footage appeared on the screen, Troy lost it. Blinding rage engulfed him, and all he could see was red as he screamed. He felt the SUV slow, and he wanted to rip the throat of the driver for daring to reduce speed at a time like this. "Driver, I'll kill everyone you've ever loved," he yelled. He didn't hear the man's response, but he felt the vehicle accelerate. He had lost her. She was gone. After everything they'd been through, she had somehow escaped him. He would kill every single guard working for him for their ignorance. How had Marcus not seen her slip through his fingers? They had one job, to protect what was his. They all knew he had a guest locked away in his home, and those idiots had let her jump out of a second-story window. When the car arrived at the airport, Troy was still seething, but at least his vision had cleared enough so he could see, and his rage wasn't demanding that he kill every living creature he encountered. Taking a deep breath, he exited the car and boarded his personal jet that would take him straight to his manor in Toledo. In a matter of minutes, he was seated in a plush window seat, and the plane was starting to roll down the run strip. Taking out his phone, Troy rewound the footage of the safe room and stopped it when he saw only Mallory in the room. He pressed play and found her curled up on the floor crying. Turning on the audio, Troy listened to her sob. This was the first time she had openly cried like this. Whenever he was away from her, he watched her footage like an addict. He was obsessed with every little thing she did and would spend hours watching her pace the room in fast-forward mode. A lump formed in his throat as he realized he had not been there to soothe her during her meltdown. Not that he would have had any idea to soothe a woman, especially a woman he had caused to cry, but he still felt a longing to ease her. Biting the inside of his cheek, he pressed fast forward. There was no doubt that he would go back and rewatch her sob all over again, but for now, he needed to know exactly what had happened. When the door to the room opened, Troy pressed play to observe and listen. He watched Jacques wander in and had a gut feeling about what was fixing to transpire. When the fool called her a pet and said he would feed her daily, the red haze returned to his vision. Terror shot through Troy's veins when he watched Mallory jump to her feet. He could see fear and uncertainty on her face. When she decided to play along, he could see how her face shifted and her body took on a different demeanor. She was using her succubus side to draw him in, and Troy decided then that he was going to remove all of Jacques' appendages one by one until he was nothing but a head without eyes, ears, or tongue. How his Mallory had been able to break through her bloodlust so she could stab Jacques with a needle and release her latch on his throat, he did not know. Every time he went to feed her, the only thing that would bring her out of the frenzy was a pleasure. After Jacques was out, it was only too easy for her to drag his unconscious body to the door and use the thumbprint scanner to exit. Once she had left the room and the door shut behind her, locking Jacques' body inside, Troy shut off his phone. Closing his eyes, he began counting back from 100 while taking deep breaths. After he finished, he began counting back again and again. At some point, his hands quit shaking and his fangs retreated into his mouth. Even after he calmed down, Troy kept himself in a meditative state, focusing only on his breathing and the feeling of his heartbeat for the entire duration of the flight. He knitted his mind to be calm when he landed so he could be in complete control. Mistakes always happen in a state of chaos. The jostling of the aircraft and the sounds of the brakes as the plane rolled to a stop informed Troy that he had made it back. Taking one last deep breath, he opened his eyes. He would search the property now that he was back and review the cameras. Then he would torture and kill Jacques. If that lowlife had any family to speak of, Troy would have been tempted to slaughter them as well. He needed to find her as soon as possible. It had already been hours since her escape. The longer she was out there on her own, the more bodies were going to pile up from her accidental kills. She might not have realized it yet, but she was not in control of this new body of hers. It was feral and had pressing needs that cannot be fulfilled by an average human. No, human blood was too weak for even a pure-blood, natural-born vampire to survive on. She'd be lucky if human blood even curbed her appetite. She needed his blood, or she would surely die in a short matter of time. During his time meditating, Troy focused on feeling her pull. It was out there, even if it was nothing more than a faint whisper to him. He had felt her moving further away the closer he got to Toledo. She must have thought that it was possible to outrun him. Unfortunately for her, she was wrong. He could feel her pull out there, especially since he had been the one to change her. His blood running through her veins sang to him from the distance, and it would be that melody that he used to track and find her.